real. And probably by the time this episode airs in mid to late October, that fireplace is going to be on.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure to have a fellow past master on as we welcome worshipful brother Cedric Jacobson to the Craftsman Online podcast. Hello.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
What I love about your title as past master is the lodge that you're a past master of is the Masonic Lodge of Research number 401 in New Haven, Connecticut. For those of us that have never even stepped foot into a lodge of research, tell us what it's like going through. Before we get into the letter G, we are going to talk about that. But what is it like becoming a member of a lodge of research and then getting into the officer line and eventually sitting in the East?
Sure. So it is an affiliation-based lodge. Like we don't confer degrees, and the role of the leadership of the lodge is largely based around gathering research-based presentations, papers, and presentations, and then publishing a compilation of those each year, or every few years, depending on frequency. So it's a chance for brothers who are interested in sort of scratching that research-based itch to do so and practice like compiling research in an organized fashion and then presenting it to a friendly audience and kind of like workshopping ideas, getting feedback. And then some of our presentations have been shared with local lodges. So if you need an education speaker for the evening, we have kind of a list of brothers who can get out there and talk to other lodges about kind of deeper meanings or historical references in ritual.
So it's kind of fair to say if you had a motto, it would be thinkers wanted, apply within.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
love that.
And that as we get ready to talk about one of the most controversial letters in Freemasonry, which is the letter G, it was interesting. You were telling me the beginning of this whole research project for you started with a little black notebook and somebody asked you a question about the letter G. What's the origin story?
Yeah, there was a brother at my mother lodge, which is Hiram Lodge number 1 in New Haven, Connecticut. Our right worshipful brother Sal Ferrigno, a past master of that lodge and district deputy. And Sal, at a night of instruction, we were talking about a line from the ritual, and he said, "Well, what does that even mean? Like, what are they talking about there?" And it is a line that isn't in every ritual that I've seen, but it is in many. And it's in the second half of the Master Mason degree. And during that time, craftsmen are like seeking something out, and they find an object that has a faint resemblance to the letter G. And he's like, the letter G, what does that even mean? And it's sort of, made me think about the connection with the letter G in the middle chamber. And I spent, I knew like it's the only other place we see the letter G reference, like using that phrasing in ritual. And so it really made me seek out kind of the connection and the through line between the Fellowcraft degree and the Master Mason degree.
Okay, so we're kind of on the same page because you refer to it as the middle chamber lecture as well. I've also heard it as the winding staircase lecture.
Yeah.
So it's always good to have someone we're using the same lingo.
Totally.
But what's also interesting is that the letter G, without a doubt, when you put the square and compasses with it together, is the iconic logo of Freemasonry, at least in North America.
Yeah.
Around the world, certain countries and jurisdictions, they take out that letter G. So when you join a Masonic lodge, you're trying to figure out kind of a part of you, like, what is this? But then through the degree process, you learn so much other stuff that by the time that the letter G is explained to you, I'm going to guess it's the same in Connecticut. It's towards the end of that second degree. There's this wonderful lecture, and then, the brother speaking draws attention to it, and you're like, oh, yeah, all this other stuff. I was kind of wondering what that meant. So do you remember when, quote unquote, the light was turned on in your eyes that, oh, there's that letter G, and how it was explained to you?
Yeah, and I think I have a really clear memory of that portion of the degree, that sort of lights on aha moment. But I'll be honest, I don't know that I made the connection between that letter G that's displayed in the lodge and that is so common in American like compass and square logo.
Mm.
I think it didn't dawn on me for several weeks that like, oh, that is the same G.
Mm. Okay, and much like, and again, Freemasonry steeped has a lot of biblical references, is not a religion, but I'm going to make this fair comparison
Mhm.
because I believe it's much like when people quote scripture. There's what the Bible has actually written, and then there's the esoteric interpretations or the spiritual interpretations or the historical relevance of it. Same
Yeah.
kind of works with like Masonic ritual. So when
Mhm.
it was explained to you in your second degree, like, hey, this is what the letter G is, this is what it means, what were your thoughts? Did you go, "Oh yeah, I get that," or did you start going, but could there be more?"
Yeah, I think that was obviously early in my Masonic journey. And at that point, I was doing everything I could to absorb the lessons as presented, and that particular section of ritual is laden with information that I wanted
Mhm.
to work to internalize. Um, but now looking back, the letter G is explained to us as having like two meanings. Um, Referencing the mathematical practice of geometry and alluding to a deity or a supreme architect of the universe, right? Um, and then it's kind of like period, and we move on, and we don't really talk more about geometry. Um, the supreme architect of the universe does make some reappearance in terms of influences later, and I think for that reason, it kind of ends up being like a surface level illusion and not like a living, breathing lesson for our practice as Masons.
Mm. This is going to kind of lead up to another question I have here because I like where you left that. So, do you feel that this explanation, let's for lack of a better term, do you feel that that leads to like common misconceptions or maybe oversimplifications that Masons now have about the letter G? And if so, what would some of those be?
Yeah, I think not necessarily misconception. Maybe I guess it's overlap between misconception and oversimplification. Like I hear the word geometry, and what I think of is, my like sophomore high school math class. Drawing
Yes.
triangles and using the law of sines and um,
The when am I ever going
calculating.
to need any of this stuff in life ever? Yeah.
I think that it is helpful to, as we're investigating like deeper meaning, think about the context in which this ritual is kind of like codified and set down. And it's not just words on a page. These were words that were delivered to an educated audience, an educated audience that had a lot more context and sort of like historical connections that modern day Americans don't necessarily have.
Mm.
And so, as we're looking for that meaning, I think that if we don't consider those contextual clues, we miss out on kind of like richer meanings in the ritual.
Mm. Okay. Interesting. I feel like the letter G kind of points men to go back to this book that we're told that within the pages of this book are all the answers that we're looking for.
Mhm.
So that's going to lead to kind of some of the historical origins of where this letter G would have come into the fellow craft degree or the second degree
Yeah.
in American Masonic ritual. What do you feel has been the evolution of the letter G from when it first entered into our ritual into today, 2025?
Yeah. So I have a couple thoughts about that. First is that it's important to remember that at the initial formation of the Grand Lodge of England, there were only two degrees in Freemasonry, right? There wasn't the Master Mason degree as we know it today. Um, and the Master Mason degree wasn't really created until the next decade, between like 10 and 17 years later, depending on who you ask.
Mhm.
Um, and when that was sort of like set down and codified, it was primarily done so by brothers Preston and Webb, sort of in parallel. And I know you had a previous episode featuring worshipful brother Nathan St. Pierre.
Wow, bonus points.
Yeah. So I think like that sort of historical context here is really helpful when we think about kind of the evolution of ritual, and it continued to evolve as it spread. For example, my mother lodge was chartered in 1750 and actually has a dispensation to use the original working ritual, uh,
Hmm.
which has some similarities with Webb, but in some ways is different. Um, and so, and then if we kind of look at the spread of Freemasonry out west with Manifest Destiny and the spread of the population in this landscape, there were little changes and sort of little foibles, and you can almost draw a Masonic like family tree, and that's
Mm.
true of the ritual broadly. Um, I think that Webb was based out of where I live here in Boston. His work here in the U.S. was largely responsible for consistency of the middle chamber lecture. Um, and I mentioned that sort of connection that I was trying to explore between the letter G as explained in the middle chamber and the letter G as referenced in the Master Mason degree. Um, and so that had me wondering, you mentioned my little notebook that I scribbled down ideas to myself.
Hmm.
I went and looked at it again this afternoon, and I had written down a question like, well, what did, like, I know G didn't exist around the construction of King Solomon's Temple. I wonder what that sound, like how it was represented. Uh,
Hmm.
and so
The
that,
letter G itself, not what
yeah,
it stands for. Yeah.
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 And especially like I was curious about it from the angle of the Master Mason degree. And so, if we look at our modern G, it stems from kind of the Roman square script, which was circa like 1 CE. And from that point on, the letter G, as we see it and think of it, uh, has remained basically constant.
Hmm.
Its immediate predecessor is called like the Old Italic script, which is around 400 BCE. If you just sort of picture in your head a backwards letter C, it's
Okay.
interesting that C is the parent of both the hard C and G sound. Um, but here's why. So if you make a k sound and pay attention to the location of the tongue at kind of the back roof of your mouth k versus g, the tongue placement is the same. And if you look at linguistics, it's very common for things to be voiced versus unvoiced. And so if you put your fingertips on your voice box and make a k sound, it doesn't vibrate, but the g sound, you can feel the vibration in there.
Hmm.
So that just like kind of confirms the original heritage. If we can continue to trace back, we get to archaic Greek, which is around 700 BCE. It looks the thing that makes the g sound and the k sound looks sort of like a number 7 with straight lines at a near right angle. And then if we go one more step back, so we're looking around the time of the construction of the temple, we land at two separate scripts or two separate alphabets, if you want to call them that, the Phoenician and Proto-Canaanite, which is around, as I mentioned, 1000 BCE. It looks basically the same as the Archaic Greek. So that sort of 7 shape at almost
Hmm.
a right angle.
You really did your homework on this. That's impressive. We
Yeah.
got a little history on linguistics and also just the alphabet. That's fascinating. So, the question that this brother asked you, are you allowed to share it in open company or is it a secret question?
Yeah, I think that there are elements of it that are deeply tied to experiences in the ritual, and I
Mm.
wouldn't want to spoil like personal experiences of the ritual, but I do think that there's a clear connection that can be made between the letter G, representing both geometry and an allusion to the supreme architect of the universe. And I
Okay.
think that it comes to that that symbol, the sort of proto-Canaanite 7-ish shape with straight lines and an almost right angle. And so the line that the brother asked me about was uh, the faint um, the faint resemblance of the letter G. In our ritual, my mother lodge's ritual, it was the faint impression of the letter G. Um,
Hmm.
and so that shape uh, of the letter G has the shape of a square, essentially,
Okay.
right? And so if you picture a seven straight lines, almost a 90-degree angle, it has the approximate shape of a square. And so what that means is that G, referencing the name of deity, but also geometry, the idea of like right angles and squares is essential in geometric thought and process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, if we're considering other connections to like other elements of ritual, I think that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, this is fascinating because we went from talking about the letter to it now representing something large in itself and like a symbol.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm sitting here in my head going, yeah, the way that you're talking about this, if you take and everyone should be able to picture it in their mind right now that we talked about earlier, that Masonic logo, that iconic, that square and compasses with the letter G in the center. And as you know, a brother that has gone through, whether it's your first degree or all the way through to all three, you understand a bit of that concept of who the grand architect of the universe is. And now, Cedric, you're doing a great job and like mentally like illustrating how this is all connecting to
Yeah.
that bigger piece. That's amazing.
Well, buckle up because it goes on.
There's more.
There is more. So I think often about um, what we're charged to do, and bettering ourselves and continuing our own education as Masons. Um,
Mm,
we are a question that I think about often is, how frequently do we actually pick up and use our working tools? We're not working with stone, but if we purport to value geometry, and that's literally half of the explained like textual meaning of the letter G,
mm,
we ought to. We ought to value it, and we ought to value it enough to practice it. And
mm,
if you look at geometry traditionally, like going back to the old times, it can basically all be explored with two implements: straight edge, think ruler or the 24-inch gauge, and a compass. And that's it. Like from those two tools, uh, you can do much, much more than you think. Like I picture compass, I'm like, oh, look, a circle, check.
mm,
Um, but with those two things together, you can do much more than you think. Um, you can make all the platonic solids, right? So a perfect triangle, square, pentagon, and all the way up. Um, it's meditative to play around with these implements and see how the circles and the lines can interact, and you can try to make new things. And that sort of like act of trying this out is beneficial because it sort of like lets you disconnect from the world and all the things going on around us in our heads and on our phones, and just
mm.
put pen or pencil to paper and explore. And I think that
Yeah.
that's like the perfect time to consider the letter G.
I agree. You've actually cast the letter G in a whole new light because I think most of us just see it at lodge. We see it on rings or other symbolic things that brothers or people are wearing around. And maybe there's that time during the degree where like, oh yeah, it's reminded me. Thanks. It's all about the angles and my relationship with deity. And
Mm-hmm.
okay, good, great to know. I never thought of the letter G as a working tool because I
Yeah,
think of the working tools as the actual tools that they built this temple with,
right,
which math was a theory and
right.
it was a science, and that
Mm-hmm.
is not your traditional hands-on tool. That's using the big muscle in your head to figure
Mm-hmm.
all that out. So I love that you say we need to start your day or include that in your life, like, am I living to the value of the letter G? My question is, and this is happening before, I love my favorite role in any Masonic lodge was when I was the lodge education officer, and that was
Mm-hmm.
working with the new brothers through all their degree work. And they would ask great questions, and we were going through the catechism and loved it. I have often found that this, as I call them, their white rabbit chase became my white rabbit of truth chase, where we would try to find this out together because
Yeah.
they asked questions I never knew. So has your interest in the letter G continued on your own, or are you still trying to track down the original answer to the original question that was posed to you?
Um, yes. Yes to both. Um,
Okay.
so I think it prompted, at the time when I still lived in New Haven, the location of my mother lodge, we had a program. We had meetings twice a month, two Thursdays a month.
Mm.
One was typically a degree, and the other was education. And then in the off Thursdays, we had various programming. And one programming that we implemented when I was in lodge leadership there was a book club. So every month we would read a book, we would come back. Around the time when we were exploring this letter G, it was the same sort of core group of guys interested in pulling at the thread and seeing where it led us. Um, we decided to read a relatively short book on sacred geometry, and sort of
Mm.
it included like geometric constructions. And at that night, for the book club discussion, we all brought out our little compasses and we played around, and through that work, we actually uncovered something that, upon further research, was kind of an old trick, an old understanding that they used in operative masonry, and
Hmm.
that is that with a compass and a straight edge, you can make a square. Um,
Okay.
and so, if you picture the act of making a circle with a compass, uh, you have the point in the middle and the compass around it, which we know is its own separate Masonic symbol that I love to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But picture that in your head. We draw a line straight through the center point. We call that a diameter. From the end of that line, if you add another line to any point anywhere on the circle, inside the circle, another line, and then draw a third line from the end of the line you just drew back to the start, you end up with a triangle. It doesn't matter, whether you do a really big angle or a really small angle. No matter what, that angle that touches the circle is 90 degrees.
Hmm.
And so, if we look back in operative masonry, many of the tools, hammer, chisel, plumb, things kind of like work on their own with minimal maintenance. Something like a square, where it's often made of wood or metal, things that are a little bit more susceptible to weathering and warping. It was really important that builders try their square, check and calibrate their square. And that was the easiest way to do it. Draw a big
Mm.
circle, and try your square. Um,
I love this. This is like a little Masonic science lab, and
yeah.
I could see why this totally captured your attention because you have a pretty deep professional and personal background in science. So, with your personal work and your professional work in this, like, were you starting to like just you'd be at work in the lab or wherever that might be at your desk and be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm unlocking all the secrets of the mystery. I understand time."
Yeah, I think that it is a fortunate side effect of my
Mm.
like training as a scientist, that I feel like everything is figure outable, uh, and that there's everything is kind of interconnected. And I scratch at one symbol, this letter G, and it takes me back to the point within a circle, which was, that was like the first research paper that I ever did, was about the circle point.
Mm.
Um, and it's, the more I research, the more I realize how connected each of these seemingly disparate bits of knowledge are. And so the Masonic ritual and use of symbols is really self-reinforcing.
Mm. If you could, uh, if I could just entertain you with this story for a
Hmm.
second, because this is what I love about masonry. I am not a scientist, and I am the furthest from a mathematician ever. I purposely chose a career path where I could stay away from the math because I hate it. Good with the words, not the numbers. So recently, we had to order a new refrigerator for our house because the ice maker broke down. So I order the refrigerator. Oh, before I place my order, it's still in the cart. I'm like, you know what? I should probably just triple check that it's going to fit in the cabinet that has been built for said refrigerator to go into.
Mhm.
Well, now I got to find where's my tape measure. I can't find. I know I have 3 of them, and there's somewhere in this house, but my wife, they just disappear. So I'm like, well, I could try to use my phone, but I'd have to get the lights on in the kitchen at the right angle to be able to get. So I'm like, you know what? I could just measure the existing refrigerator, and then I would know, hey, if it's at least not into. So I all I could find was my wife's little sewing tape measure that
Yeah.
just goes for so. So I'm trying to do that, mark it, and then get it. And I'm like, this isn't gonna work at all. Finally, I'm like, I wonder if refrigerators are like cars, and I could just open it up and it'll say, boom, it is. It's just like the inside of your car door. There, I know it's 70 inches tall. I needed to make sure that I had clearance for 70.5 inches. So I now took the tape measure and just measured the space, the gap, and I was like, it will fit. So was I using all of my, when I think of the 7 liberal arts and sciences during the winding
Mhm.
staircase or the middle chamber lecture, your ears must have perked up where I was like, no, there better not be a quiz on any of this. But it is interesting to show that having conversations and brothers and friends like you in my life, it does make me sit here and think, well, how could I solve this problem? Even though there was probably a much simpler way to do it. Through trial and error, I eventually got there. With that story in context,
Mhm.
do you have any tips or suggestions on how you can have conversations about the sciences with people who are less informed or less engaged without losing them in the audience?
Yeah. I think like you did science. Science is not it's not a body of knowledge. Science is really just a way of thinking, a sort of
Mm,
systematic, what options do I have available? How can I go about solving this problem? Here's what I think might be the answer. That's all that science is. And like human beings are natural scientists. I have a 2-year-old, and he is like, you can see it. He's just constantly looking and noticing and seeking
mm,
connection. And I think we as adults in this world, adult life can be kind of oppressive. But I think that seeing how kids look at the world really makes me want to, shed some of those shackles and that feeling like downcast and just look with new eyes, because there is a ton to see and take in and wonder about. And I think that that capacity to stop and wonder,
mm.
rather than nowadays I feel it in myself, even like you knee jerk reaction, pull out your phone and you get an answer from the World Wide Web in 30 seconds. um,
Mm.
but that sort of wondering and thinking and problem solving that you did with your fridge, that my toddler does every time he's trying to get his water up on the couch, it's
I'm
like
sure he'd figure it out faster. They're like raptors. They know how to test the fence line kids,
that's the
man.
truth. That's the truth. I
Scary.
think that's how I feel about science. And in terms of the 7 liberal arts and sciences, like that's what it is. It's not a body of knowledge. Really, it is just a
Mm.
way of contextualizing and thinking and wondering about the bigness and interconnectedness of the world.
Right. And to that point, we had started the conversation before I hit the record button. And I said, we're going to have a great time talking about this because the letter G is the most controversial letter in all of Freemasonry because you have brothers that, God love them, they studied their ritual book. They've been to that second degree a bajillion times, and they are waiting to hear that the letter G stands for God. And that's all they want to tell you is that
Yeah.
that's what that means. Then you have the other brothers that say, well, wait a second. They said another word before they said God. They said geometry. It stands for geometry. Then you have other guys that say, well, it also stands for the great architect of the universe. And you're like, whoa, we've got a 3G conversation going on in this room here.
Mhm.
It'd be impressive if we could get to 5Gs, but I've ran out of examples. What are some of the, through your research in this, and I can tell you're the guy that when you got into this rabbit hole, there was your nightstand, it must have just filled up with books, and your YouTube history search must be
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
What
definitely.
were some of the more esoteric or lesser known ideas about the letter G that you uncovered during your research that you can share with us that are kind of cool?
Yeah. So I think really the square and compasses, like that logo that you draw us back to,
Mm,
uh, that is really the letter G in triplicate, right? Like we talk about G representing both geometry and the name of deity. The square aspect, we talked about how that really is an ancestor to the letter G itself, and the compasses are the way in which societies and professionals back in the day created that right angle and letter G. But if your question is really about like interesting things that I came across, one of my favorites is that idea of the compasses representing deity. And if you look at
Mm.
Renaissance art, especially late Renaissance art, um, pictures of uh, God the Creator or of Christ, many pictures, you see uh, that representation of deity using a compass to sort of circumscribe the world.
Mm.
Whether it's a ball that they're holding in their hand, or there's a really famous painting that, or not painting, it's called a frontispiece, a front piece of art in a book by
Mm.
Blake, William Blake. Something about creation. Its original name is in French, but it's a picture of like a bearded, god-looking guy bending down with a compass, circumscribing the world.
Hmm.
So the compass is sort of representing divinity in historical Renaissance thought, and pre-Renaissance as well. Um, and then that's sort of like when I mentioned historical context for what ritual is talking about, like people in Elizabethan England, as you know, ritual is being codified, they had some of that cultural memory that has been shed over the last 250 years.
Mm. I got an idea to float by you because you're a research guy. So as you were talking about that, I started thinking about it. It's like I never thought about the compasses representing deity. But then I started thinking about what the compasses produce, as you said, which is a circle. So you start thinking of all of the things that the circle represents, which the circle represents beauty, the circle represents softness, it represents strength at the same time. It
Mhm.
represents a beginning without an end, or an end with no beginning,
Right.
depending on how you want to look at it. It represents perfection. It represents security. It represents life. It represents love. It has so many things that it represents. It really is one of the most powerful symbols that's out there that we completely take for granted. And I don't know anyone that can draw a perfect circle free-handed. It really takes a master to be able to put the compasses down to say,
Mhm.
this is how big I'm going to make this circle. um we could have, and we are going to have, and next season you're going to come back. This is a to let you know, and we'll have another discussion on the point within a circle,
Yeah.
which is my Masonic white rabbit. But I never really thought of using. It's interesting how the pursuit of finding the explanation of the letter G led to that idea, which I am going to carry that with me for many days, and can't wait to just randomly email you some morning, Cedric, and say, "Hey, dude, after I got back from my run this morning, I had this crazy idea about this. What do you think?" And then you got to write that down in your black book and go
Yeah,
find it out.
absolutely.
The circle will continue.
There it is.
Well, you kind of talked about this earlier, and it was a question that I wanted to have. Is I want to be respectful of your time, and get you back out of here to be with your family. Um, how to incorporate this liturgy? I just talked about the symbolism of the circle. That's a great way to think about deity.
Mhm.
Um, What's a key takeaway for you that you hope that our listener is sitting here saying, "Hey, how can I internalize this powerful symbol and kind of make it one of my working tools in my daily life?"
Yeah, I think that it depends on how philosophical you want to get with an answer to a question like that. Um,
Mm. Go as deep as you can go,
okay. So I
or as
think,
high.
yeah, I think that if we consider the classic Masonic logo, the square and compasses with the letter G, it really shows us that some meanings in life are very obvious and out there and in your face, like the letter G has
Mm.
two meanings as explained in ritual, period. Um, but there are sort of hidden connections and undercurrents and manifestations of both geometry and deity all around us, right? And my hope is that through this conversation you can see a clear connection from both the compasses and the square to the letter G itself, and
Mm.
sort of all that implies and connects with throughout the rest of Masonry and the rest of our lives as upstanding men.
Quick follow-up trick question.
Uh-oh.
For our listener who might be in the UK and
Mhm.
is under that jurisdiction where the G doesn't exist, does the square and compass and that logo that we have, if you take out the letter G, can you still find the same meaning?
I
Or does
certainly
it
think
change
so.
everything? Okay.
I certainly think so, especially given the historical context that we discussed in art via the sort of act of creation, often being represented with compasses. The fact that a square is a representation of like the earthly manifestation of deity. You
Mm.
make the compass, or sorry, you make the square from the compasses, um, and a sort of another connection as we think about the position of the square and the compasses as you progress through the 3 degrees of Masonry. Initially, sort of our earthliness really supersedes and covers up divinity, right? Our presence here on earth clouds our vision, and it's easy to forget the connections out there in the world. And then in the fellowcraft, where it's offset, we are kind of like stepping one foot into a divine realm and starting to see connections. Whereas the hope is, by the end of the Master Mason degree, you sort of overcome that earthliness and make a connection with deity and see broader connections and experiences through life.
Worshipful brother Cedric Jacobson, I have never said this at this point of the year, but I cannot wait until next year to get you back on here. For now, thank you for being a guest here on the Craftsman Online podcast.
Thank you so much, Michael. It was really a real pleasure to be here.